listening to The Mark Cox Show. Find everything Mark Cox at 971talk.com/Cox.
In the aftermath of this heinous act, one thing must permeate. The Ohio State University is a place for all people from all backgrounds and all beliefs. We will not cower in the face of adversity, but rather our student body will come together as one Buckeye family. We are a community of love for all people at all times, and we will work tirelessly to ensure that no matter who you are or where you are from, you will feel safe and welcome here.
Kumbaya. That's the student body president at Ohio State University in the wake of what happened on the campus, apologizing because of stories that this kid who attacked these people with a car and a knife somehow felt pressured because of his religion. So that was the student body president apologizing for any role the campus may have played in that, instead of blaming the perpetrator who committed the violent act. And the other funny thing about that is that this kid, who's probably a senior at Ohio State, stands up and apologizes on the campus and says that they welcome everybody with every view. And the man that was in my studio 5 minutes ago, Nick Adams, who's an Australian immigrant to this country, who goes around and gives speeches on the greatness of America, spoke at Ohio State University 1 month ago and faced protesters outside of his speech. He was not welcomed on the campus of the Ohio State University because he was giving a speech about the greatness of America. That's the diversity of the left. Just want to make that point before we moved along. Speaking of Ohio State University, our guest right now is David Inserra. He's a policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign and National Security Policy. David, how are you?
I'm doing all right today. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much. There's been a lot of focus on what happened at Ohio State and whether or not this kid was inspired by ISIS or was simply a lone wolf, and I don't know if they ever came up with evidence that he had been contacted by ISIS. Had you heard anything different on that?
Yeah, so I've watched most of the press conferences that have been going on with the FBI and what the police are saying. At this point, it seems as though they're still trying to get to the heart of exactly how much influence ISIS or other Al-Qaeda propagandists like Anwar al-Awlaki have played. And so we know that there's some role, and the FBI has alluded to this, but I don't think we're going to know just how deep that influence goes until the FBI finishes their investigation, which sometimes, unfortunately, takes a while.
Yeah, that's true. And I read the story today that they described this kid as a social justice warrior, that he'd had a lot of social media posts, and he'd been part of a group working on microaggressions and where people were discouraged from using certain words out of fear that they may offend someone. I mean, at some point, it strikes me that whenever these terrorist attacks have happened, we've looked for some way to justify why the person went nuts, when in reality, what you're dealing with is someone who's very clearly got mental issues.
Yeah, at the Heritage Foundation, we keep track of these plots, these Islamist terrorist plots and attacks against the U.S. Homeland, and this sad incident at Ohio State brings that total to 93. That's since 9/11. We've had 93 Islamist terrorist attacks or plots against the U.S. Homeland since 9/11. And the reality is the one thing that all these people have in common is that they all tried to use violence as a means of promoting some sort of radical Islamist ideology. That's the common denominator here. And so how we can deal with this threat of Islamist terrorism, we need to address that. We need to talk about how we can fight this threat. We need to talk about how our law enforcement can do it, how our communities can do it, and that includes not just efforts here, but also abroad. And I think we need to be paying more attention to that side of the equation than whatever else is being talked about right now.
I agree with you completely. We had a gentleman on here a couple months ago, Liz. His name fails me right now, but he was a a whistleblower who worked with the Department of Homeland Security, who argued that under the Obama administration's guidance, they had basically withdrawn from a series of investigative procedures that in his opinion might have put them in front of some of these attacks. For example, like the one in Southern California, in San Bernardino. Do you see that as a problem, that the U.S. has changed how it investigates or tries to prevent these sorts of homegrown terrorist attacks?
Yeah, I think post Edward Snowden, there's clearly been a lot of discussion about the role of intelligence and the different programs and tools that are out there. And I think, unfortunately, from my perspective, a lot of some of the tools that we would have formally used have obviously come under question. Some of them have been reformed or changed, and there's going to be more debates on some of those laws going forward. Even coming up in this next Congress, there's going to be some of these debates occurring. And so I do think that there's been an effect about how it is we go about investigating and then trying to find terrorism. And I think events like this at OSU should remind us that just because we don't want to just because we don't want to be in Iraq and that people are tired of war abroad doesn't mean that these terrorists don't want to come here. That doesn't mean that those terrorists don't want to incite and inspire people here to engage in terrorism. And we need to be ready to stop those folks before they ever get near a school or a mall or any of these soft targets.
Right. And I don't know, let's assume that David Inserra was named director of the Department of Homeland Security tomorrow. What might you recommend that they do differently?
One of the things that I would first look at doing is how can we make sure that state and local law enforcement are really getting the resources, the information, and the training they need. When you have active shooters, when you have incidents, terrorist attacks like you had yesterday, especially these lone wolf attacks, which are often going after these really soft targets, the FBI probably isn't the first one on the scene. The reality is it's going to be a guy who's on patrol. The guy yesterday was checking out a gas main leak, I think is what it was. These are the folks who are probably going to be the first one on the scene, and we need to make sure that they are getting training. There's actually a federal law enforcement training center that has classes on how to handle these types of situations. Let's make sure that our first responders have that kind of training. Secondly, we should make sure that state and local law enforcement agencies have the intelligence to maybe figure out what's going on in their community. They're sharing information with the FBI. We need to make sure the FBI is sharing back with them.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to your statistics that you mentioned earlier, the vast majority of those attacks you mentioned since 9/11 have been homegrown plots, correct? Mm.
Yeah, so of the 93, 82 have been homegrown, and so this speaks to, I think, the real challenge because a lot of the time that's been in this campaign, the presidential campaign that just passed, a lot of talk went into vetting, and certainly we need to talk about vetting. We need to talk about how we're preventing bad people from entering the United States. But the reality here is that a lot of people are coming to the United States, or they're citizens. They've been here for their entire lives, and they're radicalizing. And so that's a homegrown terrorist. And so how we deal with those types of threats, you can't just say, well, let's do vetting. We need to talk about what we're doing in terms of, like I said, state and local law enforcement. What does the intelligence inside the United States look like? How are we finding these folks and preventing them from getting anywhere near their targets? So it's a slightly different problem, and unfortunately, I think it's a more difficult problem to solve. Yeah,
it's a good point. David Inserra with the Heritage Foundation. Direct people to heritage.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Have a great day. Here's the bottom line for me. I'm not suggesting that the Department of Homeland Security has a crystal ball where they can tell that an 18-year-old freshman at Ohio State University is about to go off the deep end. You simply can't monitor every single Facebook page in America because the kid had apparently done an interview in which he complained about Islamophobia and mistreatment of Muslims. I don't care. I mean, they may not have been able to prevent this particular attack, but I refuse to let our society be blamed for this. They are not to blame for nobody forced this kid to pick up a butcher knife and stab people on the Ohio State University campus. He doesn't have a right to not be offended any more than I don't have a right to not be offended. That gets us back to the whole cupcake argument that we kicked the whole show off with today. Grow up. 314-969-9797. When we come back, Ron Barber joins us here in the studio. He's helped put together a training video that's going to be used by our law enforcement agencies trying to learn from the lessons in Ferguson.